Hey, I'm Pat, and in this video I will be covering tuples and everything you need to know on how to use them efficiently in Roblox Studio. So, a tuple is basically just a list in Roblox. So we got this function, right? We have parameter 1 and parameter 2. If we say wanted to return parameter 1 plus parameter 2 and also return parameter 1 minus parameter 2, then what we would be doing is we would be returning a tuple, since there are two values that we are returning separated by a comma. So basically a tuple really is just a list. It's very similar to an array, except it works a lot differently, and it does take up slightly less memory than an array would. So what we can do is we can now get our function. See, we can do results 1 and result 2 just like we did here, where our two variables are separated by a comma, and then we can just do equals test function 1 and 2, and now what will happen is it will pass 1 and 2, right? And then I'll add them, subtract them, and the first result will get stored in our first variable, and the second result will get stored in our second variable. Not too complicated, right? So this is basically just a tuple. Now, say we want to take this like another step. So what we could do is say we want to take these two parameters and we want to pass them straight into a function. Like say we want to do random number math.random and test function. So now what will happen is the first argument passed to math.random will be our first result here, and the second argument will be our second result here. So we're directly passing arguments to it. We don't even have to like separate it or tell it which ones we want to do. It doesn't matter. It'll automatically read tuples through your argument list or your parameter list because it's a list. So a tuple is very similar in that way. Now, say we have a function and we want to take a tuple into the function, say an unlimited amount of parameters into the function. Then what we can do is we can put these three dots, which will represent a tuple. So what we can do is we can say print ... And we're going to get back to this return in just a second, but I want to show you this when it runs. We got to get rid of this too. I'll just comment it. I don't know, one sec. So test, and we'll run it. View output. We get 1 and 2. So you can see we passed it 1 and 2, and it prints out 1 and 2. We can pass it as many arguments as we want. It doesn't matter. And say we want to also have like a normal variable here, like we want to get the player and unlimited amount of arguments afterwards. Then we can get our first argument will always be the player, and then anything afterwards will be placed inside of our tuple. So now if I do this again, we'll get 2 and 4 instead of 1 and 2 because 1 is getting stored in our player parameter. So the next thing what I want to do is show you how to modify this tuple. Now there's a few things that you can do with tuples to say modify them. The first thing you can do is we can just put it straight into a table by doing something like this. Now you can also do local table.create, and then we can do ... I haven't showed you how to get to one. Actually, I'll just show you right now. So the way we interact with our tuples is we use a global function called select, and there's two things we can pass it in the first argument. We can either give it a number or a string. I'm not going to focus on the number just yet, but we're going to talk about the string right now. So if I pass it a hashtag, which is actually the only string that we're allowed to pass this function, that will give us the length of the tuple and the second argument. So if we do this, it will give us the length of the tuple, which will tell us how big we want our table to be, and we just pass the tuple, which will be the actual values of the table. Now this is a lot faster. Table create apparently is pretty slow, But table create is pretty good if you want to make like a pre-made array with a selected amount of memory allocated already, which is nice because then you don't have to worry, like each time you add a value you don't have to allocate new memory, which makes it like slightly faster in the long run, but we're not going to talk about that. This is about tuples. So we can use it as a table, and at this point it's just a normal table, right? Now if we want to take a table and turn it into a tuple, we can do table.unpack, which will turn our table into a tuple, or we could do table.pack to turn our tuple into a table. Again, it's just faster to use curly braces, so it's better to use this, and it's a little bit more like cleaner to read, in my opinion at least, because it's a lot more minimal. So that's pretty much that. But say we don't want to do this, say we want to keep it as a tuple because tuples take up slightly less memory, and say we already got the tuple, there's no point in putting it into a table, because if we do that, then that's an extra line of code, and that's a call on a function that isn't exactly needed when we could just keep it as a tuple, which will be slightly more performant. It's like a micro optimization really, but it's an optimization at best. Most my speech just broke, but you get the idea. So if we want to keep this as a tuple, what we can do is say we want to get say the first value of a tuple. Then what we can do is we can use select, and then you can see it says index here. So this will be our index. So the first, or if we pass it 1, that'll give us the first value in the tuple. But it also returns all the values after index 1. So it returns index 1 and all the values after it as well. But since there's only one variable here, it's going to store the first value that is returned into the variable. Now, if we say want to get multiple values, like first value and second value, this is not how you spell second. We want to get that, then we can keep it the same thing because it's going to give us all the variables afterwards, and it's just going to keep autofilling them as we need them, which is pretty interesting way of using it. But I don't know how much that means, but you know, you kind of get the idea. But say we want to store the sum of all of our numbers inside of our tuple. Now this gets a little bit different. So what we'll do is make a for loop, I equals 1, and this is how we'll loop through tuples. You already saw how we get the length of a tuple, so that's all we need is the length to know how many iterations we're going to do. Now what we're going to do is make a variable called local sum, and now sum will start at 0 plus equals select 1, or not 1, I, which will be your index since that's our for loop iterator, or our for loop variable, iterator variable, whatever. And then we just pass it our tuple, and now this will increment sum by all the values that we pass it. So now if we do print sum at the end, whatever. I didn't want to hit play, but it doesn't matter. They made it a lot faster, which is nice. So you see we got 7 just like we wanted to, but say we want to pass only one variable, one argument value from a tuple. Then what we can do is we can do, say, select 1, and then we can wrap it in parentheses, and this will make sure that it only returns the first value. So if we want to only get the first value 100%, then we can just wrap it in parentheses, and it'll always give us the first value that is returned. Alright, makes sense, right? And so that's pretty much the basics on how tuples work. So that's kind of how tuples work in a basic sense. Not super complicated or anything, but I thought it was a cool topic to make a video on because there's not a lot of info about them, surprisingly. And now I want to show you some use cases, because I'm sure you're wondering how you could use this at all. So here I have I don't know why I have that, a network module, which basically all it does is it allows me to only use one remote event. So all of the remote events that the client fires will be handled through this specific function right here, since we only have one remote event. So what we'll get first is the player, and then the action that the client wants to perform, and then a tuple afterwards, because the client could pass us whatever it wants. It's going to pass us all kinds of different arguments, and it doesn't really matter what it's passing us, but we're going to have to interpret it and pass it along anyways. So next thing we do is we find our function. Basically what I do is I got a folder here with a bunch of modules, and it'll take all the modules and it'll take the functions out of every module and store them into one big table based off of the function's name. So that way every time that we take in a request from the client, we can get the action, which will be the name of the function that we want to execute, and we can just get that by indexing our giant table of functions, and then we can just pass it our tuple that the client sent us, so that way we can forward it to the function. Pretty simple, right? And then another use case, which I think is one of the best use cases for a tuple, is a chat command system. So basically what we do is, yeah, I use table.unpack here, but you'll see why I want it in a tuple anyways later on. So what we do is we take our message and we split it by a single white space. So basically every space will be a different thing, which will allow us to get the prefix, you know, the player that we want to put the command on, and then the action and other information about the command, right? So next thing we do is we check to make sure it's the right prefix. And then what we do is we go ahead and use our get player function, which, you know, not too complicated. It just looks for a player based off of their user ID, username, or display name, using the second value. So the first value is our prefix using select, right? And our second value will be their name. And then what we do is we get our player object. I'm not really going to go over what the player object is here, but you can think of it as literally just a player object that has methods for doing whatever, like adding XP or doing a certain action. So what we do is we get our player object, and now what we'll do is we'll make sure that our player object has a method with the name that we were given, and we'll make sure that it is a function before we call it. And then what we do is we go ahead and index it with our tuple select, and then we pass it the player object, because that's going to be the self. Since this is a method, we got to pass self as the first argument. And then what we do is we pass the rest of the chat command. So since we used the first three for identifying the command, the prefix, the player that we're casting it on, and the action of the command, the rest of it is going to be values that we're passing to the function for handling the actual command. So we can do that just by using select 4, because it'll give us the fourth value and everything after that as a tuple, which is pretty useful, right? I don't see, this was originally a table, yeah, a table, so I had table.unpack there, but I don't need that anymore. So you can see that's a pretty decent use case for tuple as well as select, because here this is really where select is actually useful. The rest of it doesn't really matter. It could be a table for this, and you can just table.unpack it down here like I showed you, because that can be a little bit cleaner. You can see we have all these selects and these extra parentheses. I don't think, in most cases, I don't really need these parentheses wrapped, but it's good to like show that you're only intending to get the first value there, and it also kind of asserts that that is what's going to happen, and you don't have to like worry about it not working right. So that's pretty much it, really. Hopefully this video gave you some insight on a new topic, because I see a lot of people that don't even know about this. I didn't even know about this either. I didn't even know what select was or that it even existed for a long time. So hopefully you found it useful. You thought this video was cool. If you did, tell me. I don't know. I was gonna say like leave a comment or something, but I don't really like asking for that shit. So do whatever you want. I don't care. Thanks for watching. See ya.